in the year 450 before Christ, in the rocky hills surrounding ancient Arcadia, a Greek traveler walked under the scorching midday sun. The heat made the air shimmer above the white stones, and the silence was broken only by the strident chirping of cicadas. But something was unsettling. That man. His eyes nervously scanned the shadows between the twisted oak trees, as if expecting to see emerge from them, not a common animal, but something that defied nature itself. He had just left behind a small sanctuary dedicated to Zeus Lykaios, the wolf Zeus, and carried with him a story he had heard from an elderly priest, a story that spoke of men who transformed into wolves, who ran under the full moon with a hunger for human flesh, and who later returned to human form as if nothing had happened. The traveler did not know whether to believe it, but something in the priest's gaze, something in the tremor of his voice, had made him shudder. The legend was not new. Since time immemorial, the inhabitants of Arcadia had whispered about wolfmen. They spoke of Lycaon, the king who had defied Zeus himself, and who for his impiety was transformed into a beast. But was there any truth to it? Or was it just another myth invented to frighten children and keep men away from the forests at night? The traveler quickened his pace. The afternoon was waning, and he did not want to be on the roads when darkness fell. For if there was one thing everyone in Arcadia knew, it was this: when night came, it was better to lock the doors and pray to the gods, because in the darkness, the elder said, wolves were not just wolves. Centuries before that, nervous traveler, in Arcadia itself, a banquet was about to forever change the history of humanity, and the gods, King Lycaon, sovereign of that wild land, had prepared a reception for an illustrious visitor. But it was not a mortal king, nor an ambassador from distant lands. The guest was Zeus himself, father of the gods, who had descended from Olympus, disguised as a common man to test the piety of mortals. Lycaon was known for his cunning and his cruelty. His 50 sons had spread terror throughout Arcadia, and the king himself was accused of human sacrifices in secret rituals dedicated to dark forces. When Zeus arrived at the palace, Lycaon immediately grew suspicious of the foreigner's true nature. His eyes gleamed with superhuman intelligence, and his presence radiated an authority that no mortal could possess. Instead of honoring the guest with a worthy banquet, Lycaon decided to put his divinity to the test. He ordered one of his servants to be killed, and had his flesh prepared and served at the table, mixed with the meat of sacrificed animals. If that foreigner was truly a god, Lycaon thought, he would know what he was eating. If he was just a man, he would notice nothing. Dinner was served at sunset. Torches burned on the walls of the great hall, casting dancing shadows over the faces of those present. Zeus took his place at the table. Lycaon watched every move, every expression, hoping to see confusion or revulsion. But what he saw was something much worse. Zeus's eyes narrowed. He looked at the plate before him, then Lycaon, and finally his expression turned into divine fury. Thunder rumbled in the clear sky. The pillars of the palace shook. "Dare you offer me human flesh?" Zeus's voice was like the roar of a storm. "Dare you test the omniscience of the gods with your Lycaon tried to back away, but it was too late. Zeus rose from the table, and his mortal form began to glow with unbearable light. The king of Arcadia fell to his knees, but found no mercy, only justice. And the justice of the gods is terrible. The transformation began with his hands. Lycaon watched, horrified, as his fingers curled, his nails grew and darkened, becoming sharp claws. Gray fur sprouted from his skin, covering first his arms, then his chest and back. His bones cracked and reorganized. The pain was unbearable, but he could not scream, for his mouth was already elongating into a snout full of sharp teeth. He fell onto all fours on the palace's marble floor. His eyes, which had once sparkled with malicious intelligence, now burned with animal hunger and a spark of imprisoned consciousness. Zeus had left his human mind intact inside the wolf's body so that he could fully understand the curse he would carry. "I transform you into what you have always been inside," declared Zeus, his voice echoing through the columns. "A bloodthirsty wolf, a merciless predator. May your outer form reflect your inner soul for all eternity." The wolf that had been Lycaon howled, a sound that mixed rage, despair, and a terrible hunger that was already beginning to consume him. He fled the palace in leaps, disappearing into the forests surrounding the city. The servants who witnessed the scene were paralyzed with terror. Some fled. Others fell to their knees, begging the gods for forgiveness. But Zeus was not finished yet. He raised his arms, and lightning bolts descended from the sky, incinerating Lycaon's palace. The fire consumed the halls where impiety had reigned, the chambers where human sacrifices had been performed, the kitchens where human flesh had been prepared as if it were animal meat. The flames could be seen from all over Arcadia. For 3 days and 3 nights, the palace burned, and when the ashes finally cooled, all that remained were blackened ruins and the memory of a king who had defied the gods. But the story did not end there. In the forests, the wolf ran under the moon, and they said that sometimes, on starless nights, one could hear his wail of lament, a sound that was almost human in its anguish. Shepherds began to lose sheep. Then children began to disappear. Lycaon's curse had not only affected him, it had contaminated the very land of Arcadia, and soon others would begin to suffer similar transformations. Decades after Lycaon's curse, a young warrior named Damarchus prepared for the most important trial of his life. At the sanctuary of Zeus Lykaios, atop Mount Lycaeus, the priests gathered once every 9 years for an ancestral ritual, a ritual that few understood but all feared. The ritual was simple in its brutality. A young man had to swim across a sacred lake near the sanctuary. If he managed to reach the other bank without looking back, he would be blessed by the gods. But if he failed, if he looked over his shoulder, or if something touched him in the waters, Lycaon's curse would fall upon him, and he would be transformed into a wolf for 9 complete years. Damarchus had volunteered. Some said he was brave, others that he was foolish, but he had his reasons. His family was poor, and the promise was clear. The one who completed the ritual and survived the 9 years would be rewarded with honors and riches. More importantly, he would be considered a hero, someone who had faced the curse of the gods and lived to tell the tale. The night of the ritual arrived. The full moon hung over the mountain like a silver eye watching everything. Damarchus stripped off his clothes and hung them on an ancient oak tree, as tradition dictated. The priests chanted in a language so old that they themselves did not understand all the words. The air was heavy with incense and something else, something that made the hair on the back of Damarchus's neck stand up. He approached the edge of the lake. The water was black as obsidian, perfectly reflecting the moon and the stars. It seemed infinitely deep. Damarchus took a deep breath and plunged in. The water was icy, much colder than it should have been on a summer night. He began to swim with strong strokes, keeping his eyes fixed on the opposite bank. But something was wrong. The water seemed to pull him down, as if invisible hands were gripping his ankles. He swam faster, his heart beating wildly. It was then that he heard it, voices coming from underwater, whispers in ancient Greek, calling his name Damarchus ... Damarchus ... See what they have become ... Double quotes. Damarchus clenched his teeth and kept swinging. The voices grew louder, more insistent. Now he could feel something brushing against his legs, like seaweed or fingers. He was only a few meters from the opposite bank, only a few meters between him and safety. Damarchus, your father is here. ... He called us. He knew what you would do. ... Double quotes. That was too much. Without thinking, Damarchus turned his head and looked back. For an instant, he saw faces under the water, pale and bloated faces, with eyes that shone with a sickly light. He saw hands reaching out to him. And then he felt a searing pain run through his entire body, as if every bone was breaking and reorganizing at the same time. He screamed, but the sound that came out of his throat was not human. It was a howl. He managed to reach the bank, but not with hands. He dragged himself out of the water with gray paws covered in wet fur. His body had completely changed. Where there was once a young warrior, there was now a wolf with yellow eyes. The priests watched impassively. This had happened before. It would happen again. Damarchus tried to speak, tried to beg for help, but only growls and whimpers came from his wolf mouth. His human mind remained intact, but it was imprisoned inside an animal's body. 9 years, said the eldest priest, his voice echoing in the night. For 9 years you will run with the wolves. If, during that time, you do not taste human flesh, at the end of the 9th year you may return to this lake. Swim across it again, and your human form will be returned to you. But if you yield to hunger, if you kill a man or a child, you will remain a wolf forever. Damarchus howled again, a sound of desperation that made the birds flee from the trees. Then he turned and ran into the forest. The transformation was complete. Another werewolf was running through the lands of Arcadia, and as he disappeared into the shadows of the trees, the priests were already preparing for the next ritual. 9 years from now, another young man would try his luck, and would probably fail, like so many before him. Because Lycaon's curse had not died with him, it would live forever, passing from generation to generation, reminding men that the gods do not forgive those who defy them. 3 centuries after Lycaon's curse, in the libraries of Alexandria, a scholar named Apollonius of Tyana pored over ancient scrolls. His mission was different from that of the other sages who frequented that sanctuary of knowledge. While they sought to understand mathematics, astronomy, or philosophy, Apollonius sought something darker: the truth behind the legends of men who transformed into wolves. What had led him to this search was not academic curiosity, but an experience that tormented him. Years before, traveling through Arcadia, he had witnessed something that defied all logic. On a night of the full moon, he had seen a man writhe in agony, his body deforming until it took on the appearance of a massive wolf. The animal had looked directly at Apollonius, and in those eyes he had recognized something impossible: human intelligence imprisoned within the beast. Now, surrounded by piles of manuscripts in Greek, Latin, and even older languages, Apollonius began to piece together a disturbing picture. The stories of werewolves were not mere fables. They were records, testimonies, warnings passed down through the centuries. He found the account of Herodotus, written 400 years earlier, describing a people who inhabited the lands beyond Scythia. It seems that the Nuri are sorcerers, the Greek historian had written. For the Scythians and the Greeks settled in Scythia say that once a year each Nuri turns into a wolf for a few days, after which he resumes his human form. Apollonius bit his lip. Herodotus was known for his accuracy. If he had recorded that, it was because multiple sources had confirmed it. But what would cause such a transformation? Was it magic? A divine curse? Or was there something more? Something that science had not yet understood? Another scroll revealed the account of a poet named Virgil, who had written about a certain Maurice, capable of turning into a wolf and hiding in the forests. I have frequently seen Maurice become a wolf and hide in the woods, the verse said. I have seen him summon souls from the depths of the tombs. The connection between werewolves and death appeared repeatedly. Apollonius noted, there is a persistent link between the transformation and the dead. Those who become wolves frequently desecrate tombs, as if the beast within them yearns not only for the flesh of the living, but also for that of the dead. The most disturbing discovery came from a much older manuscript, written in almost illegible archaic Greek. It told the story of the Zeus Lykaios ritual with details that Apollonius had never seen before. The author, an anonymous priest from the 5th century before Christ, described human sacrifices performed atop Mount Lycaeus. Every 9 years, Apollonius read with growing horror, a man must be sacrificed to Zeus. His entrails are mixed with those of animals and cooked. The one who eats the human part will be transformed into a wolf. He will live as an animal for 9 years. If during that time he does not touch human flesh, at the end of the 9th year he can resume human form. But if he kills and devours a man, he will remain a wolf forever. Apollonius let the scroll fall onto the table. His hands were trembling. This was not a myth. It was a real ritual, practiced for centuries. How many men had been transformed? How many had succumbed to hunger and remained beasts forever, running through the forests of Greece? He searched for more records and found them. Pliny the Elder had documented the story of a certain a Greek athlete who had participated in the Olympic Games. According to Pliny, Demetrius had eaten human flesh during a sacrifice to Zeus Lykaios and was immediately transformed into a wolf. He lived as an animal for 10 years, until he finally recovered human form and returned to compete in the games. But the most shocking story came from Petronius, the Roman writer. Apollonius unrolled the scroll with eager fingers and read the account of Niceros, a soldier who witnessed the transformation of a companion. My master had gone to Capua to sell old clothes. I took the opportunity and convinced a soldier who was staying with us to accompany me about 5 miles from the city. We set off at cockcrow, and the moon was shining brightly. When we arrived among some monuments, my companion began talking to the stars while I kept singing and counting them. Apollonius leaned over the scroll, his eyes wide. Suddenly I looked back and saw my companion strip off and place his clothes beside the road. My heart froze. In an instant he turned into a wolf. Don't think I'm joking. He began to howl and ran into the forest. At first, I didn't know if I was dreaming, but I went to where he had left his clothes. They had turned to stone. Apollonius stopped reading and massaged his temples. His headache throbbed. All this seemed impossible, and yet there was too much consistency in the accounts. Different authors, different eras, different places, but the same elements. Sudden transformation, the preservation of human consciousness within the wolf's body, and above all, the terrible hunger that took hold of the transformed. He returned to Petronius's account. The wolf attacked the farm and killed all the cattle, but it escaped, although one of the servants wounded it in the neck with a spear. When I returned home at dawn, I found my soldier companion lying in bed like an ox, with the doctor tending to his neck. I then realized that he was a visipellis, a skin changer. I could never eat bread with him again. The Latin word echoed in Apollonius's mind, skin changer. The Romans knew the phenomenon as well as the Greeks. But what caused the transformation? Why did some men turn into wolves, while others remained human? He found part of the answer in a medical treatise written by Marcellus of Sidon. The doctor described a condition he called lycanthropy, a form of madness in which the patient believed he had turned into a wolf. The afflicted, Marcellus wrote, wander at night, especially in February, living precisely like wolves in every respect. They frequent cemeteries and live exactly like dogs and wolves. Apollonius frowned. Was it just madness, then, a disease of the mind that made men believe they were wolves? But that didn't explain the accounts of witnesses who saw the transformations. It didn't explain the clothes that turned to stone. It didn't explain the wounds on the soldier's neck. There was something more. There had to be. He continued searching, turning page after page, until he found an obscure reference in a text fragment attributed to The author mentioned a practice in certain barbaric tribes, the use of ointments and unguents that caused visions and altered consciousness. They rubbed their bodies with these substances, the text said, and believed they have turned into animals. Apollonius leaned back in his chair. Drugs, poisons, mind-altering substances. Could that be the explanation? Men using hallucinogenic ointments, falling into deep trances, and in their delirium believing they had become wolves. But then he remembered. He remembered that night in Arcadia, the man he had seen transform. There had been no ointments, no rituals, just the full moon, a cry of agony, and the impossible change from human body to wolf body. He had seen the bones bend, seen the first sprout, seen the face elongate into a snout. That had not been a hallucination. It was real. Apollonius stood up and walked to the library window. Outside, the sun was setting over Alexandria, painting the sky red and gold. The city was bustling with life. Merchants were selling their wares. Children were playing in the streets. Couples were walking hand in hand. A normal world, a rational world. But beneath this normalcy, there were shadows, there were secrets, there were things that reason could not explain. He returned to the manuscripts. There was one last document he needed to read. It was the oldest of all, a papyrus fragment so fragile that it threatened to disintegrate at the touch. It was written in Mycenaean Greek, a language that very few could decipher. But Apollonius was one of those few. The text spoke of Lycaon, the original king, but it told a version of the story different from the one everyone knew. According to this account, Lycaon was not transformed only for having served human flesh to Zeus. He was transformed because he possessed forbidden knowledge about the true nature of gods and men. Lycaon had learned. The text said that men and beasts are not as different as they seem, that within every man there is a sleeping wolf waiting to awaken, that the human form is just a mask, a prison for something older and wilder. Apollonius's fingers trembled over the papyrus. Lycaon tried to prove this to Zeus. He tried to show the god that he himself, in his arrogance, had the beast within him. That is why Zeus punished him, not for impiety, but for knowledge, for having seen the truth that the gods wanted to conceal. The text ended with a warning. Lycaon's curse was not placed upon him alone. It was placed upon all humanity. For within each of us sleeps the wolf, and under certain conditions, beneath certain moons, when circumstances are right, the wolf awakens. And when it awakens, nothing can stop it. Apollonius backed away from the papyrus as if it were burning. His heart was pounding. Around him, the Library of Alexandria stretched in silence, its shelves full of knowledge accumulated over the centuries. But suddenly, all that knowledge seemed useless in the face of the truth he had just discovered. He gathered his notes with trembling hands. For months he had researched, collected accounts, compared testimonies, and now he had his answer. An answer that brought no comfort, but terror. Werewolves were real. They were not just madmen who believed they were animals. They were not just criminals wearing wolf masks. They were men in whom something had awakened, something primitive and violent that normally slept beneath the surface of civilization. The transformation could be caused by many things: by participation in ancient rituals, such as those practiced on Mount Lycaeus, by the use of drugs and ointments that released the inner beast, by curses cast by angry gods, or simply by the full moon acting upon those who already carried the seed of transformation in their blood. But the most terrifying thing of all was the final conclusion. Any man could become a wolf. The beast was inside everyone, waiting. And once awakened, it was almost impossible to fall back asleep. Apollonius looked out the window again. Night had completely fallen over Alexandria. The moon was beginning to rise on the horizon, large and white. Somewhere out there, in the dark streets or on the plains beyond the city, perhaps there were men looking at that same moon and feeling something stirring inside them. A hunger, a rage, a transformation beginning. He closed his scrolls and put them away carefully. This knowledge was dangerous. The truth about werewolves could not be widely disclosed. It would cause panic. It would make people distrust each other, looking for signs of the beast in their neighbors, in their friends, in their own families. But it also could not be forgotten. It needed to be preserved, passed on to those wise enough to understand it and use it. For those who, like him, would dedicate their lives to understanding the dark mysteries that hid at the fringes of reality. Apollonius left the library walking slowly. His legs were weak after so many hours sitting. The night air was cool and heavy, with the smell of the sea. He took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind of the images that haunted it. But he knew he would never forget. He would never stop looking at the people in the streets and asking himself, how many of them carry the sleeping wolf? How many have already felt the transformation begin? How many fight every full moon to keep the beast imprisoned? And the most terrifying question of all, what about me? Is there a wolf inside me too, waiting for the right moment to awaken? He had no answer, and perhaps that was better. In the next chapter of Lost Legends, we will delve into the Norse werewolves, berserkers, and metamorphoses, where Viking warriors transformed into beasts in the bloodiest battles in history. Get ready to discover how the ice of the North hid secrets even darker than the Greek legends, because sometimes what seems like a legend is just the part of the story that hasn't been told yet.